Hello and welcome to the next match in the public sector debate competition. I'm Tomika Gunmighty, communication specialist here at the Transformation Implementation Unit and your host for this match. This is our fourth staging of the public sector debate competition, and we are happy for those of you who are joining us online or here at 6 Saxthorpe Avenue. This year's competition got off to a great start this morning. If you are just joining us, remember you can catch up on the exciting matches either on our Facebook or on our YouTube pages. Continuing the action this afternoon, we have with us the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and the National Environment and Planning Agency, and they will be debating the Moot. Be it resolved that despite competitive pressures posed to PPV operators, JUTC subsidies provide a net benefit to society. I know we're all excited to get the match started, but we'll have our teams introduce themselves. I invite the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation to begin with the introductions.
Good afternoon. My name is Raymond Poison.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Osborne, and I'm the second speaker for the proposition.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny Clark, and I'm your third speaker for the proposition.
Thank you so much, Team Proposition. We'll now turn our attentions to Team Opposition as they introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akira Moulton-Ferron, first opposition speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michaela Miller-Cawley, second speaker for opposition.
Good afternoon, everyone. Camille Douglas-Stevenson, and I'm the third opposition speaker.
Thank you so much, Team Opposition. We now invite our adjudicators, members from the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment, to introduce themselves.
Pleasant afternoon, everyone. The name is Javon Downey, and I'll serve as your chair adjudicator for this match.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll be your wing adjudicator.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantal Hughes, and I am also a wing adjudicator for this match.
Thank you so much, our judges. I now turn over to the judges. The teams are familiar with the rules. All the best to both teams.
All right. So just before we start, just a brief reminder, recap of the rules. You are allotted your respective speaking times at the first minute and last minute of those times. It's protected times. That means there will be no points of information. We'll indicate by the ding of a bell. When you have spoken for the allotted time, we'll indicate by a double ding of the bell, after which you're allotted a further 15 seconds to wrap up your speech. We will ding continually to indicate that you're out of time. After each set of speeches by the first and second speakers, we'll enter a period of cross-examination, and I'll explain the rules further when we get to that section. At this point, we now welcome the first proposition speaker. Here.
Good afternoon, honorable judges, my esteemed opponents, members of the audience. Today, we, the proposition, firmly support the Moot. Be it resolved that despite competitive pressures posed to PPV operators, the JUTC subsidies provide a net benefit to society. The central point of this debate is not to discount the usefulness of PPV operators in the transport sector, for indeed they play a useful role. But instead, it's to highlight the net benefit to society that the government subsidies to the JUTC provide, even if they pose challenges to private operators. We will demonstrate this by showing that the subsidies result in a net benefit that can be further disintegrated into social, economic, environmental, and stability. Let me introduce some key terms that are required as we go along this debate. JUTC, the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, a government-owned entity formed in 1998 to provide safe and structured transit service for commuters within the KMTR due to the haphazard system that existed. PPV operators. These are licensed individuals for providing public transportation in minibuses, road taxis, and coaster buses. Subsidies. This refers to any form of financial support granted by the state or a public body to help an industry or business keep the price of a commodity or service low. Net benefit. This refers to the overall positive impact derived from a strategic action or commodity measured against total cost. Competitive pressures refer to how an organization responds to the competitor's pressure and adapt. And society, which refers to a group of people residing and interacting in a definable area and sharing a culture. As the first speaker, I will focus on the social benefit, and this will include safety and stability. The second speaker will mention and elaborate on the economic and environmental benefit as to why competition should not override the public good. Our final speaker will speak and anchor the points outlined by the previous speakers and provide a rebuttal. Let me go into the social benefit. Inclusion is a cornerstone and the fundamental tenet that underpins the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This tenet is simple: leave no one behind. For thousands of Jamaicans, especially the low-income groups, the elderly, and students, the JUTC represents their only affordable option in the public transport sector. It is their silver bullet to drive in livelihoods and accessing opportunities, thus improving the quality of their lives. Subsidies allow the JUTC to invest in larger buses capable of moving over 250,000 commuters daily and designed to cater to all persons, including persons with disability and physical needs. This in turn improves accessibility and promotes social inclusion by affording diverse individuals with equal opportunities to engage in daily lives. Just imagine the national impact if subsidies to the JUTC were removed. This would inevitably result in the absence of these net benefits we speak of, which means less than 38.9% of students with CSEC passes in 2024. It will further mean more than the 12.2% of Jamaicans currently in poverty would be plunged into further poverty. My colleagues, my opponents, just listen. It will result in higher than the 4.5% of unemployment rate and increased crime and further pressures on social and welfare programs. Adjudicators, removal of subsidies could lead to social unrest, especially if it results in increased fares and reduced service. The impact on the low income and vulnerable groups could be dire. This could lead to social instability. Guess what? And in the words of one prime minister, it could lead to bangarang in Jamaica. The subsidies represent government commitment to securing the fundamental rights of the most vulnerable. Reduction in social inequality can have a positive effect towards bridging the gap between rich and poor, those who can afford private cars and those who can't and have to rely on public transportation. Therefore, subsidies to the JUTC act as a buffer to safeguard the national interest and prevent the tragedy of the commons, where PPV operators would act with impunity and instability, such as arbitrary fare increase, spontaneous withdrawal of service, and wanton indiscipline on our roads. Speaking of roads, it takes me to safety. Statistics from the Road Safety Unit show that PPV drivers and passengers accounted for 7% and 6.6% of road fatalities in 2023 and 2024, respectively. Of course, the JUTC drivers are involved in accidents, but when the overall cost and impact are measured, the risk is greater if one were to travel using PPV. In concluding, we on the proposition believe that the JUTC subsidies are equally necessary and justified. The words of Luis Alberto Moreno, former president of the Inter-American Development Bank, are true and profound when he said, and I quote, "We need to quit treating transportation subsidies as a drain on public funds and instead view them as strategic investments that generate huge social, economic, and environmental returns," unquote. The subsidies allow the JUTC to provide a public service that would disappear and national development progress thwarted if they were to be removed. Ladies and gentlemen, adjudicators, my opponents, the subsidies are for national development and should not be removed. Thank you.
All right, so we thank the first speaker on side proposition for a fiery start to this debate, and we invite the first speaker on side opposition to do likewise. Hear, hear.
In 27 years, the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, JUTC, has grown an average of 5 routes to serve its over 250,000 passengers daily. Members of this noble house, good afternoon. The opposition rejects the moot at hand. We believe that the JUTC has actually succumbed to competitive pressures of the other public passengers' vehicles, and here's why. A net benefit is defined as a measure of benefits against harm. It says whether a scheme is worthwhile on a whole based on indicators, social, economic, institutional. Public passenger vehicles, as outlined by the Transport Authority, is a licensed motor vehicle, taxi, minibus, minivan, used to carry passengers for reward or hire. They bear the notorious red plate. This includes the JUTC. Competitive pressures of which we speak is the dynamic and efficient service delivered to Jamaicans by non-state funded PPVs, and a subsidy is a government benefit given to remove a burden in the public interest. Let me just pause here and say that since November 2023, the JUTC has been rolling back fares to $100 and beyond, but paying $150 on another PPV operator to another PPV operator is actually a premium price for productivity. In fact, since March 2025, every Jamaican has been saving their extra $2,000 to ensure that they have their own little pro box on the road. The opposition admits that the JUTC has the potential value to serve up a net benefit to the people, but in its current state, day-to-day, year-to-date operations does not serve a net benefit to the society. As first speaker, I will demonstrate this from an environmental and social perspective. My second speaker will outline economic and legislative arguments, and our reply speaker will reinforce this position and make recommendations. The JUTC is not an environmentally sustainable mode of transportation, fundamentally betraying its own operational mandate of providing a modern, world-class mode of transportation. The government, now pushing for sustainable production and consumption based on Sustainable Development Goal number 12, has moved to promoting electric vehicles through incentives and tax breaks. In 2023, plans to purchase 200 electric buses was announced to be done over the next 3 financial years. These buses would be furnished with lower floor seats and ramps that would provide safety and security to the disabled communities. To this date, only 3% or 6 of these such buses have been added to the fleet. Compressed natural gases fueling these buses continue to be just a buzz term. The JUTC fleet is still generally powered by diesel fuel. This hope for net reduction of emissions continues to be a net promise. Socially, JUTC subsidies does not amount to a meaningful measure of social security for the society. We, the opposition, accept that public transportation does not have to turn a profit. Its value, however, lies in accessibility and social transformation. Taxpayers subsidize the JUTC to the tune of 11 billion. And in February 2024, the Gleaner reported that the JUTC was projected to hemorrhage 16 billion in that financial year. Yet, the JUTC is chronically inefficient, unreliable, and fails to meet the dynamic transport needs of the Jamaican people. Commuters routinely wait for over an hour for buses that may never arrive. When they do arrive, passengers actually carry their own little piece of hand towel so that they can wipe the seats from the leaking AC vents. I remember those days. Good times, but poor social welfare. This kind of screams beggars can't be choosers on the taxpayer's dollar. In contrast, my opponent, other PPV operators have adapted quickly. They have responded to the commuter demands. They operate with entrepreneurial agility, filling critical service voids in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. This while under JUTC monopoly that gives exclusive rights to some routes and loading stations that are actually preferred and more accessible by commuters. While subsidies to the JUTC are often defended as a means of social upliftment, in reality, JUTC being subsidized to the tune of billions has failed to deliver widespread equitable benefits. Vulnerable groups and deserving corridors have been neglected. We appreciate that the JUTC has expanded its reach to Yallas and Maypen and even Norbrook, but there are still critical routes within the Kingston and St. Andrew metropolitan region that have been neglected. And the JUTC has just recently gone to places like Hanover. Members of the public continue to be burdened. They are forced to be late for work and school because they have to wait on a JUTC bus. Moreover, they are stretched financially, having to take the alternative transport routes. Students in rural areas are still waiting until September at least to have access to safe, affordable, and reliable transportation that have Wi-Fi. Distinguished audience, members, my opponents, judges, having assessed this moot in environmental and social parameters, the opposition maintains that while there is potential value for the JUTC in its current form, the JUTC does not provide a net benefit to the society.
All right, so we thank the first opposition speaker for an equally interesting opening to the case. We will now enter into the first period of cross-examination where proposition will field 3 questions to opposition, opposition first will field 3 questions to proposition. Each question is limited to 10 seconds and each response limited to 30 seconds, and then we'll invite proposition to field their questions to opposition. Opposition ready?
Can you point, opposition, can you point to any recent audit or audit report or any report at all that shows JUTC operating efficiently or meeting performance benchmarks?
So we just want to bring you back to the moot. We're not here to debate whether it's performed. Once we're here to debate whether or not there are net benefits to society. We have not, our first speaker did not say that the JUTC is without any fault. What we are saying is that the net benefits outweigh whatever it is that may be any efficiency or whatever inefficiencies may occur within the JUTC. But we really would like to stick to the moot itself, which refers to net benefits. Thanks.
Question.
Your first speaker mentioned stability. How can you deem the JUTC as stable when there are so many inefficiencies in the operations and execution of its mandates?
Yeah, respond.
The inefficiencies as outlined by the question posed by the opposition is not unique to the JUTC, all sectors of society. We need to put into context the economic space within which we operate in Jamaica, which allows us to provide basic public goods. And in doing so, the JUTC, through its subsidies, continue to provide reliable and stable service. The JUTC is not withdrawing service in any other way that impacts the commuters.
All right. Opposition, your final question.
Thank you. My opponents, how do you justify inclusion and leaving nobody behind when rural communities are still largely serviced by non-PPV operators, by other PPV operators rather than the JUTC?
Kindly bear in mind that we are talking about the Jamaica Urban Transit Company here, not a rural or a widespread service. And bear in mind also, the purpose of the JUTC, when it was created, was to provide transit service in the Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region, which is urban areas. Bear in mind also that the JUTC has even sub-franchise routes across to help bolster the service that is provided to commuters.
All right, we thank you, opposition, for your questions, and now we invite side proposition to field questions to team opposition.
How do you propose to maintain or improve urban mobility if the JUTC were to reduce service due to a lack of subsidies?
My worthy opponents, I don't believe that we have at all stated that we are advocating for JUTC to not be subsidized at all. What we're simply inquiring about and what we're dealing with today from the Moot topic is whether or not these subsidies are actually allowing JUTC to provide the net benefit to the society itself.
Question.
Natural gas, CNG, is so bad a fuel to be using, why then does the JTC report of 22% emission reduction using said fuel?
My opponents, we're not saying it is bad. We never said that any at all. We are talking about a net benefit. We actually want the JUTC to use these subsidies to provide more compressed natural gas vehicles. That is what we want. We want the subsidies perhaps to be redirected so that we can reach that environmental threshold in a shorter time. Net benefit. The JUTC has the potential, but currently is not serving that net benefit, my opponent.
All right, side proposition, your final question.
On the routes that you mentioned in your speech that are not currently being served by the JUTC in the Kingston and St. Andrew metropolitan area.
Could expound on that, my opponent, but I think it will be derailing this debate. The net benefit to the society. Can you, I'd like a question that speaks to the mood. The net benefit that JUTC is providing to the society. In my mind and in our mind, that question is contrary to the mood. And that's bringing us down a rabbit hole.
All right, thank you, teams. No, you cannot respond. Thank you, teams, for an interesting opening period of cross-examination. We now invite the second speaker and side proposition to come continue their case. Hear, hear.
Good afternoon. I rise today not merely in support of this motion, but with a resolute conviction that subsidizing the JUTC is justified and the net benefit to society is essential for an equitable, prosperous, and sustainable Jamaica. My colleague has laid the foundation by highlighting the JUTC's role in promoting the net social benefits to include safety and stability to society. As the second speaker for the prop, I will advance our case along two major pillars: the economic and productivity benefits and the environmental advantages of subsidizing the JUTC. The opposition claims that subsidies to the JUTC are wasteful, chronically inefficient, and unreliable, and that privately operated PPVs are more efficient. But let's ask the question, efficient for whom? Yes, PPVs may be efficient for their operators looking to maximize income, but market efficiency is not the same as public value. What happens to the single mother in Spanish Town who simply cannot afford daily PPV fares? Or the university students commuting from Portmore? Or the minimum wage earner scraping to reach downtown Kingston? PPVs chase profit. JUTC follows people. And in a society where public value, not private profits, should guide public policy, the difference is not trivial, it is transformative. Let us be clear, transportation is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. According to the Planning Institute of Jamaica, over 60% of the Jamaican workforce depends on public transportation. For workers in low income or informal jobs, affordable transit is often key to survival. Consider this. The JUTC recently introduced the 52B bus service from Grandy Hole in St. Mary to Halfway Tree. A commuter traversing this route pays 150 Jamaican dollars on the JUTC bus compared to $350 on other PPVs. This translates into a savings of $400 per day, $2,000 per week, $8,000 per month, and $96,000 per year. For a minimum wage earner, $2,000 translates to over 12% of their weekly earning, and that is the difference between being in the red or in the black. Based on the Transportation Affordability Index, affordable transportation should cost no more than 15% of household income. A minimum wage earner traveling the Grandy Hole route to Halfway Tree route on a daily basis, would spend 10% of their income on a JUTC bus and a whopping 23.3% on other PPPs. Talk about net benefit. More resources for groceries, school fees, rent, and medical bills. It gets better. JUTC's express routes, for example, Portmore to Crossroads or New Kingston, cut commute times by up to 30%. The net benefits? More productive hours, reduced stress and burnout, improved punctuality, higher national output. Now, let's imagine the Jamaica we want. Clean, healthy, livable, and future-ready. My opponents, Kingston and other urban centers are choking on congestion, choking on emissions, and traffic disorder. Ironically, the Gleaner of October 14, 2024, reported NEPA's findings of dangerously poor air quality on Spanish Town Road and in Rockfort, largely due to vehicular emissions from, and I quote, poorly regulated PPVs. Their monitors show that the particulate matter concentrations exceed safe limits, posing serious risk to respiratory health and directly contributing to respiratory illnesses such as asthma and bronchitis, placing an added strain on our healthcare system. Here's the hard truth. Jamaica still lacks enforceable national vehicle emission standards. Until these are developed, the PPV fleet remains a major environmental offender. In contrast, JUTC buses undergo regular emission checks. New buses use CNG, compressed natural gas, and electric technologies, which are cleaner, greener, and smarter. Additionally, one JUTC bus is equivalent to approximately 14 PPVs, helping to reduce both traffic congestion and emissions. What is the net benefit, you ask? Let me enlighten you. Fewer pollutants, improved air quality, decline in instances of respiratory diseases, improvements in public health, reduced healthcare costs, and improvements in overall quality of life. Consider this as well. Refueling a CNG bus costs about 20,540 Jamaican dollars, compared to 63,200 Jamaican dollars for a diesel bus, resulting in over 4.2 million in savings across the CNG fleet. In Jamaica, in 2023, Jamaica added 170 new buses to the JUTC fleet, including 100 CNG buses and 5 electric buses. Small number, one might say, but a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. This is not just about today, it is about tomorrow. I am confident that the net benefits of the JUTC subsidies are clear, but it is also essential to highlight future net benefits resulting from the long-term sustainability of the company. The fleet will be further modernized through the procurement of nearly 200 electric buses over the next 3 years to replace older, less efficient units, cutting maintenance costs and fuel consumption. Honorable judges, the proposition stands firm. Subsidizing the JUTC is a strategic investment in Jamaica's future. A first-class transportation system serves all Jamaicans and contributes to a Jamaica that is equitable, prosperous, and sustainable.
Thank you. That is time. We now welcome the second speaker on side opposition to continue their case. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished judges, my opponents, good afternoon. I just want to address some points made by the proposition. A statement was made about JUTC being Jamaica Urban Transit. However, are we then saying that the Minister Vaz, is wrong for his March 2025 announcement of the future of the JUTC outside of the KMA and St. Catherine? It is operating illegally in Montego Bay and the Green Island. Also, proposition, a pregnant mother has to practically beg for a seat on the JUTC bus. Just to note there. Let me now go into our speech, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, Barbados and Trinidad provide subsidies to their bus systems with clear goals to maintain affordable fares, support low-income commuters, reduce traffic, and reduce emissions. These subsidies are linked to performance targets, private sector involvement, and strong oversight. Now, despite enjoying government support and protected routes, the JUTC consistently underperforms compared to other PPVs, which operate efficiently, pay taxes, and receive no subsidies. This results in a distorted and inefficient transport sector where public funds sustain a less effective service. Most honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, our argument refuting this motion is that although public passenger vehicle operators offer competitive alternatives, JUTC subsidies do not deliver a net benefit to the Jamaican society. Instead, they sustain financial inefficiency, governance failures, operational mismanagement, and misuse of public funds, which erodes equity and public trust. Proposition may hold the position that subsidizing JUTC is essential for promoting equity and accessible public transport across Jamaica, but the facts, ladies and gentlemen, tell a different story. A story of financial black holes and systemic dysfunction. The JUTC annual report of 2017 clearly highlights the company's operational breakdown. 2.75 billion lost in a single year, expenses exceeding revenues, declining ridership, and reduced bus availability. The company is still dependent on government bailouts, while commuters are left stranded or forced to rely on route taxis and minibuses. Ironically, the very operators often restricted or undercut by the state to prop up JUTC. Jamaican taxpayers are robbed and communities are punished that could be better served by competitive, adaptable PPV operators. Calling this a net benefit is not just misinformed, it is blatant lunacy. Esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, Team Opposition's final argument is simple. Without adherence to law and good governance, public entities fail. The JUTC's repeated violations of good governance, including breaches of the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act and the Government of Jamaica's Corporate Governance Framework, such as failure to conduct board reviews and submit required reports, along with the ministry's neglect of oversight, are not minor shortcomings. They represent deep systemic failures and a betrayal of public trust. Moreover, the JUTC's persistent failures characterized by operational mismanagement, poor oversight, and poor fleet maintenance, evidenced by expensive bus fires and leakages, have placed a heavy burden on public finances. Meanwhile, PPV operators operating without government subsidies continue to provide reliable and efficient service. The facts speak for themselves. Subsidizing the JUTC wastes taxpayers' money and yield little to no benefit for the country. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is time we stop mistaking bailouts for progress. The JUTC, riddled with financial losses, governance issues, and operational failures, cannot credibly be seen as a net benefit to society. Unlike the JUTC, other PPV operators function without subsidies and are directly accountable to the public they serve. Ladies and gentlemen, Team Opposition has clearly demonstrated from an economic, legal, and operational standpoint that continued subsidies to the JUTC represents no investment, but a costly burden on taxpayers and a breach of public trust. We therefore reject this motion and are advocating for a transportation system that truly serves the needs of the Jamaican people.
All right, so we thank the second proposition speaker for her submissions to this debate, and we'll now enter into the second period of cross-examination, where once again we invite side opposition rather to field 3 questions to side proposition, and then side proposition will do likewise. Just a reminder, you are urged rather to ask questions. Just get straight into the questions because you're limited to 10 seconds to ask your questions and your responses are capped at 30 seconds. Side opposition?
My opponents, if JUTC decline in ridership in favor of private PPVs or other PPVs?
If possible, can you just share with us those statistics, please, in terms of rider share? Can you share with us where it is that you've seen a decline in JUTC ridership as opposed to that of the PPVs, the general PPVs? Thank you. And we are not here either to argue ridership, to argue the inefficiencies of the JUTC, to argue whether or not the JUTC is profitable. We are here to argue whether or not the net benefits, the advantages, outweigh the negatives based on the subsidies that are provided. My opponents, the transportation index was mentioned. We gave us much quantitative data, but I'm just wondering what qualitative data do you have to support the JUTC being a net benefit? Ground truthing when we go out there basically. Well, we just talk to our families. You see the benefits. You see the benefits from your own brothers and sisters in society. Every day we all travel on the road, whether or not we are in our own private vehicles or if we are on the road in a PPV or a JUTC, we can see with our own two eyes the benefits that are there to be derived from a societal standpoint. Every day we see the disabled, we see the children who bombard the JUTC transport centers, we see the elderly, those who cannot afford it, and it is clear. So I'm not sure if it is that the opposition is blind.
All right, final question from side opposition.
On the topic of net benefit, my opponent, again, how do you justify the JUTC being more viable, profits, more for people than profit when you have PPVs that exist in communities where persons are more familiar?
Public good, a public service is not about profit. It's about enhancing the lives of people, especially the most vulnerable in society. The role of government is to protect the rights of its citizens, and the right to public, affordable, safe, and inclusive public transportation is a right, and that right is being articulated and practiced by the Jamaican government in providing subsidies to the JUTC.
All right, so we thank side opposition for posting their questions to side proposition. We'll now invite side proposition to do the same.
My opponents, the JUTC is a public entity providing a public service. Please tell us whose responsibility it is then to bail out the JUTC in times of
Public. The subsidies are there. We agree with you. We just want the subsidies to amount to a net benefit, my opponent. And what we are saying is that we're not seeing that as yet. That is the criticism that we have, and that is what we want. Essentially, we're on the same team.
I am happy to hear that you're on our team, so we don't have everyone this debate. Thank you very much. So share with us now. You keep talking about efficiency and the effectiveness. Share with us some statistics. You said the JUTC is not as effective as the PPPs.
My proponents, you want statistics. The Auditor General's report of 2020 stated that the JUTC has been operating for the last couple of years at operational loss, and the subsidies that has been given has been used not for the betterment of the company, but to bail out the JUTC because of this loss. You guys have been, the JUTC have been operating inefficiently.
All right. Final question, side proposition.
My opponents, should transportation prioritize profit for PPV over equitable access for the public?
My opponents, I'm very happy that you've mentioned equitability, because this is really one of the main points of our argument. If it is only serving the few and we are providing such a great source of funding from public sources, how is that really equitable when it does not go for the entire population of Jamaica? Key areas are still being left without service. Net benefit means that we would all be benefiting from the service.
All right, so we thank the teams for a very interesting period of cross-examination. Temperature raised a bit, so we're going to take a 1-minute break to cool down and allow the reply speakers to put the finishing touches on their speeches. And that 1 minute starts right now. All right, so now that that 1 minute has lapsed, we invite the opposition reply speaker to come and summarize the case on that side of the house. Hear, hear.
Let me begin. Mr. Speaker, panelists, fellow debaters, as we draw to a close, we, the opposition, maintain one clear position. JUTC subsidies, as they are currently structured, do not provide a net benefit to the Jamaican society. It's that simple. In this debate, we have shown that JUTC is inefficient and each year more and more irrelevant to the commuter choices. Hence the PPVs operating. The JUTC perpetuates inefficiency, suppresses the private initiative, strains the country's resources, and fails to deliver equitable and, even worse so, reliable service. 8:30 is my required sign-in. 8:31, I am late. We all know that, right? I cannot rely on a service that is one of JUTC's calling. That the JUTC continues primarily because of our unsustainable subsidies. A burden to the Jamaican people is what it is, and what is even more so frustrating to watch as a Jamaican, since we see minimal returns on the value for our money spent, and to add further insult to injury, even more so, we see that the ridership continues to decline in favor of the PPVs. Valuable resources are wasted. It's like when dog have money and him take it by cheese, and we Jamaicans cannot afford that luxury. The JUTC actually suppresses a PPV sector which is filling the gaps that the government cannot. Finally, we are also showing that the JUTC fails to equitably serve the rural, the peri-urban, and the underserved populations. How many more resources will we put into this failed venture? Our very own Minister Vaz admits to this lack of service in key areas. Remember, a net benefit must consider the value of what is lost, not just what is spent. And how can we reconcile the idea of a net benefit when, as a main public transportation system, JUTC does not serve most of the country itself? Again, I will keep saying this. Rural and peri-urban communities are currently handled almost entirely by those PPV. Mr. Speaker, we close by dismantling the myth that JUTC's subsidies serve the marginalized. There's a betrayal of social equity, as JUTC's subsidies disproportionately harm those they claim to protect. There's urban bias, as 88% of JUTC's routes serve Kingston and St. Andrew. Meanwhile, parishes like St. Elizabeth rely on PPVs for 95% of commutes. This is stat in 2025. There is a neglect of the disabled. We are promised 200 electric buses with ramps by 2025. We at NEPA fully support and believe in sustainable and environmentally sound transportation system. But people, it is April 2025. Unfortunately, only 6 of these buses are delivered. Route taxis on the ball retrofit their vans. The PPVs are demonstrating a grassroots equity in action, going door to door, providing service to these rural communities. Mr. Speaker, the proposition offered grand ideas, but ideas do not outweigh the harsh reality of inefficiency, exclusion, and waste. It's a pie-in-the-sky dream, as it is. We, on the other hand, have given you the outcomes, what exists currently, and we cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that the good intentions do not justify the bad policy. We are saying today that we believe Jamaica is deserving of a modern, responsive, multimodal transportation system, futuristic, autonomous vehicles, flying cars, even in time. One that offers equitable net benefit to all Jamaicans. But until that system is accountable, inclusive for all, and financially sound, it should not be subsidized without scrutiny. Sorry, proposition. It's not it right now. JUTC's subsidies do not provide a net benefit for society as it is today. It is for these reasons that we urge you, Mr. Speaker, and our judges, as we have, to reject the motion made by the proposition. We're just not there yet. We thank you.
All right, so we thank the opposition for bringing this debate to a close on that side of the House. Now we welcome the proposition reply. Speaker, here, to close the debate in totality.
My most worthy opponents, we could easily argue lawlessness, but we are not here to discuss that today. Additionally, let me just start. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand to concretize the proposition's position on the moot at hand that despite the competitive pressures posed to PPV operators, JUT subsidies provide a net benefit to society. Wright et al. In West Indian Journal of Engineering for January to February 2021 posits, and I quote, "Public transportation is one of the few services that caters to an entire region, regardless of economic status, and offers mobility and accessibility to everyone," end quote. Third speaker from the opposition would want us to believe that the JUTC is inefficient and they're tying this inefficiency to monetary value. However, the JUTC is not for profit. It's not profit driven. It is people driven. Public service is never for profit. Think about path. What if there was no path? Let me remind you of the strong arguments of the proposition, keeping in mind the context of the moot and the definition of net benefits. That is, after considering the strengths and weaknesses of the JUTC, we can without a doubt agree that the subsidies provide a net benefit to society. Is helping the JUTC with taxpayer money worth it for society, even if it adds competitive pressure to PPVs? Of course it is. A resounding yes. I hasten to say that even with the subsidies provided to the JUTC, new PPV operators are added daily. So it seems absurd for one to think that they are being competitively pressured. My first speaker convincingly argued that subsidies to the JUTC redound to the benefit of the most vulnerable Jamaicans. May I remind us that subsidies by the government in any sector is never to benefit those who are rich and in need of nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, the JUTC is inclusive. No one is left behind. Our second speaker did the math. But lest you forgot, tell me, which would you prefer? Taking a little longer to get to your destination on a JUTC bus and save $2,000 weekly, which adds up to $8,000 monthly, or jump on a shuttle taxi and spend $10,000 monthly? The choice is clear. More money in your pockets means you can afford to put food on the table, send your children to school, visit the hospital, and join partner at a credit union. I dare say that based on recent rhetoric, with a $2,000 weekly savings, the JUTC user can put a down payment on a Pro Box. Esteemed judges, let us talk about the benefits to be gained from the stability of the JUTC. Dr. John Paul Rodriguez, in his book, The Geography of Transport Systems 2024, notes, and I quote, "Transportation is not a mere convenience, but a fundamental infrastructure that must systematically and continuously be available to its users. This is where governance plays the important role of ensuring continuity in operations. The very same is true as the JUTC operated in a structured environment, which is not easily disrupted by externalities. There are less abrupt and spontaneous industrial actions. When there is instability in the economy, hiking gas prices, or national emergencies, the JUTC remains stable and constant. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the stats for the last 3 years. Between 2022 and 2024, commuters suffered through at least 5 major strikes by PPV operators, as reported by the Gleaner and Observer. In 2022 alone, there were 3 strikes back-to-back, September to November. They strike when it hurts. Back to school. This unstable operation impacts productivity. Aha! You may say that the JUTC is not without its fair share of strikes. The company reported 3 strikes between 2021 to 2025, but these were not spontaneous and were largely due to labor issues. The difference, ladies and gentlemen, is even when the JUTC is affected by its own occasional strikes, overall it offers a guaranteed baseline of service that people can rely on. We have seen several instances where soldiers have driven the buses to alleviate disruption. The net benefit to society is protected because transportation remains more accessible. Ladies and gentlemen, when PPV operators strike, the JUTC keeps Jamaicans moving. It is the subsidies that assures free and cost-effective movement, even when the PPVs fail. That's real stability, and that's a real net benefit to society. Now, shall we touch on the issue of arbitrary fare increases by the PPV operators? Never in the history of JUTC has this been a factor. In fact, we recall that in 2023, then Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark lowered the fares for students, elderly, and their pensioners. In a Gleaner article dated November 25, 2023, President of the Taxi Association, Eshota Newman, said, and I quote, "The commuters who would now take a taxi, they would prefer to wait on the JUTC bus because the fare would be $70, when the fare on taxi would be $150. I would do the same thing." Ladies and gentlemen, my most worthy opponents.
All right, and that is it. We are out of time.
Caught your breath yet? Caught your breath? Wow, wow. very fiery debate. Ladies and gentlemen, the arguments have been made in the debate between the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and the National Environment and Planning Agency. And they debated the moot, be it resolved that despite competitive pressures posed to PPV operators, JUTC subsidies provide a net benefit to society. Ladies and gentlemen, give them a round of applause again, please. We will now have a short break while our judges deliberate and sum up the match. The next voice you'll hear will be our chair adjudicator, who will let you know who won the match. Please stay tuned.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. I know we've been waiting with bated breath, but we have to allow due process to take its course. So we want to thank both teams today for a very riveting match. We heard arguments across both aisles of the floor deciding what is a net benefit and whether or not the JUTC provides one. However, we as a panel of adjudicators didn't think that there was a clearly established metric or measuring stick by how we define or come about a net benefit. So something that would have been helpful in the debate would have to say something to us as such. And net benefits equal total benefits over your total costs or your total advantages divided by your total disadvantages. So in that case, we'd have a clear understanding or a clear line of measurement to decide how exactly do we come by a net benefit rather than to just give the general definitions of what net benefit is. Nonetheless, we adjudicated the debate as it unfolded, and here's what we found. So, for the first speaker, we thought that the contextualization of the debate was fair, but could have been developed or fleshed out a little bit more. When you tell us why we should continue providing subsidies for the JUTC, tell us also in no uncertain terms why, and show us how exactly it ties back into being a net benefit. Right, so remember, we are not just giving claims. In the debate, when you give us the claims, we want them to be warranted and to be impacted out, right? One of the major clashes that we got throughout the debate, and this is really what the debate revolved around in its entirety, was whether the JUTC was efficient or it was inefficient. Right? So when we talk about a net benefit, we are examining how the service impacts the masses in a positive way, hence the term benefit. So on side proposition, we get a list of gains that we can realize or that we are realizing in the presence of the subsidies that were listed out by the Prime Minister. And he argued that those, if we removed the subsidies from the JUTC, those benefits would have been taken away or they would have been stopped. But he never really gave us the real, he never warranted out he never warranted out the impacts of such a move to show us, okay, so if this is done, then this is how it will impact things in a global way that impacts the masses, right? And then on side opposition now, we get some kind of contestation to that and say to the arguments posited, because they came and they said, okay, we cannot be saying a system that is inefficient by nature is providing a net benefit, because efficiency has a direct contrast with providing a benefit. So they told us that the JUTC is inequitable by nature because it is being funded by all of the taxpayers, yet only a specific subset of the population is receiving this service. So that in and of itself would mean that it cannot be providing a net benefit. Then we had this idea of timeliness. On side proposition rather, they were saying that persons are willing to pay, willing to sacrifice arriving at work a little bit earlier just so they can realize some savings. But on side opposition, they are arguing that that is not the case because people want to be productive. So what we find happening is that people are actually going to pay the premium price, as they put it, right, to get to work early because, again, it comes back down to being productive and being efficient. So if the JUTC was being efficient and thus providing a benefit, then we would not have had this kind of clash, right? They also spoke about on-side opposition, some of the limitations to why the JUTC cannot be providing a net benefit. They told us about the damaged buses, they told us about the availability on certain routes, and then they told us that JUTCs overall are continuously dependent on government bailout. Right? So on side proposition, they argued that the JUTC is a public service. It is not operating to make a profit. But even so, even if it's not operating to make a profit, there is, again, in the minds of the reasonable citizen, the understanding that the JUTC should be operating at least at break even. Right? So they are not incurring a loss and they are not making a profit. But the JUTC should be self-sufficient in such a way that the government does not have to continually bail them out of these economic or operational failures as the opposition posited, right? So just some general pointers before I make the call, or before I announce the call. So guys, it is incumbent on us to remember our roles, especially for the reply speeches, right? Reply speakers, you're not to introduce new arguments or new points. You can engage with ideas that were already posited, but develop them or explain them in a new and a more impactful way. But to come with entirely new arguments, new claims overall is not allowed in the debate, right? And just generally, for the first speakers, you want to ensure that you contextualize and set up the debate in a way that is, again, in keeping with the spirit of the debate. You want to ensure that that is done in no uncertain terms. Do not leave room for interpretation. So when we are deciding and we are debating about what a net benefit is, don't just tell me the definition of a net benefit. Show me, make it applicable to me as a reasonable, well-read citizen that, again, does not require any specific or any specific knowledge to understand it. So tell me, a net benefit is when you have the good outweighing the bad in these kind of tangible ways. It shows up or it is evident in these kind of ways. So when you tell me that now, as a panel of adjudicators, it is easier for us to weigh which of the sides are actually making more sense to say, okay, this is why it is not a net benefit and this is why it is a net benefit, as opposed to not giving us any measuring stick and we have to just take the ideas as you posited them and wade through them when we are doing our deliberation, as what just happened just now. And with that said, the team that won this debate ended on 273 points, and the team that placed second ended on 262, and the match was ruled in favor of the team in opposition, the National Environment and Planning Agency. We also thought that the best speaker for the debate, this individual that brought the most unique contributions in terms of content, was also from side opposition, and that would have been Miss Miller-Carley. Oh, yes, so once again, the points, NEPA on 273 and MEG and JC on 262. If you require further feedback, you can see us after the match. I now hand over back to Ms. Gunmighty.
Thank you so much to our chair adjudicators. Thank you so much to Team NEPA and Team Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Give them another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you to our viewers online. Join us here again tomorrow for another exciting 7 matches to be played tomorrow again, beginning at 10 a.m. 7 new exciting matches. I hope you learned something today. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you again tomorrow.
You are the best speaker, Jack.